What if the most powerful leaders in history didn't rely on speeches or force to command respect, but on silence? Think about Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who ruled Rome not with threats, but with quiet resolve. Or Julius Caesar, whose mere presence could shift the mood of an entire room before he even spoke. How did they do it? The answer lies in an ancient strategy so subtle, most people miss it: the art of leading without words. Stoic philosophers called it hegemonikon, the ruling faculty of the mind, and it's the secret behind influence that lasts. Picture this: a general standing motionless on the battlefield, his calm gaze steady as chaos erupts around him. His soldiers, instead of panicking, find their own courage mirrored in his stillness. That's the power of presence, a lesson straight from Stoicism. The Stoics believed true authority doesn't come from shouting orders or demanding obedience. It comes from mastering your emotions, understanding human nature, and knowing when silence speaks louder than any argument. As Epictetus once wrote, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." This video isn't just about history, it's about unlocking a timeless tool for modern life. Whether you're leading a team, navigating a tough conversation, or just trying to stand firm in a world full of noise, these principles work. We'll break down the 3 invisible tactics Stoic leaders used: the weight of presence, the discipline of emotional control, and the strategy of silence. By the end, you'll see how to influence others not by force, but by the quiet strength that comes from within, ready to learn how to lead without saying a word. Let's begin. One of the most striking examples of Stoic presence comes from the battlefield of Gaul, where Julius Caesar faced a mutiny among his exhausted troops. Instead of shouting or threatening punishment, he stood before them in silence, just one man against thousands of armed soldiers. Then, with deliberate calm, he addressed them not as their commander, but as citizens, a word that cut deeper than any reprimand. The effect was instant. His unshaken composure reminded them of who they were and who he was. By morning, the same soldiers begged to follow him again. This is the essence of Prosoch, the Stoic practice of focused attention to one's own mind and bearing. Marcus Aurelius put it simply: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Now imagine 2 leaders in a modern boardroom during a crisis. The first paces, interrupts, and lets frustration seep into every word. The second sits quietly, listens fully, and responds with measured clarity. Who inspires more confidence? Stoic presence isn't about being stoic in the casual sense. It's about radiating certainty through stillness. Ancient leaders knew that emotions are contagious. A calm leader creates calm followers. A frantic one spreads chaos. This is why the Stoics trained relentlessly in self-observation, learning to spot the first flicker of agitation before it could cloud their judgment. Think back to a moment when your own demeanor shifted a situation. Maybe it was keeping steady during a heated discussion, or holding eye contact when others looked away. That's Prosoch in action, the quiet authority that comes not from what you say, but from what you choose not to let shake you. The next time pressure mounts, remember, your presence isn't just about you. It's the invisible current that shapes everyone around you. Seneca once observed that speech is the mirror of the mind, but sometimes the most powerful reflections come from saying nothing at all. The Stoics saw silence not as passivity, but as a deliberate weapon. When you refuse to fill the air with unnecessary words, you force others to confront the weight of their own. Epictetus drilled this into his students. If you wish to improve, be content to appear clueless or stupid in extraneous matters. In other words, mastery begins with knowing when your voice adds value and when it dilutes your power. Consider the Roman statesman Cato the Younger, who once sat through an entire Senate debate without uttering a word while his opponents grew increasingly agitated, tripping over their own arguments. His silence wasn't indifference, it was a calculated strategy. By withholding reaction, he exposed their emotional investment in the conflict, leaving them visibly unbalanced. Modern psychology confirms this. In negotiations, the first person to break a silence often concedes ground. A study of high-stakes business deals found that executives who practiced intentional pauses of just 7 seconds or more consistently secured better terms. Silence creates space for the other side to reveal their hand, overthink their position, or even surrender outright. Try this in your own life. Next time someone challenges you, resist the urge to retaliate immediately. Instead, pause, breathe. Let the silence stretch just a beat longer than feels comfortable. Watch how it shifts the dynamic, how the other person scrambles to fill the void, often revealing doubts or conceding points without you lifting a finger. This is the Stoic art of apathy, not the absence of feeling, but the disciplined channeling of it. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Sometimes that means letting their words hang in the air, unanswered, until the emptiness itself becomes your reply. History's greatest mediators and diplomats understand this instinctively. When U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz negotiated nuclear disarmament with the Soviets during the Cold War, his team noted he would often lean back, remove his glasses, and clean them slowly during tense moments, a physical cue that amplified his verbal silence. The Soviet negotiators, conditioned to expect rapid-fire debates, found themselves disoriented by this deliberate pace. Shultz wasn't just buying time, he was weaponizing stillness to dismantle their momentum. Your turn. In your next disagreement, before crafting the perfect rebuttal, ask yourself, would silence serve you better? Not the silence of surrender, but the silence of the chess master who lets their opponent's impulsive move become their own undoing. As the Stoics taught, you can't control others' words, but you can always control your response. And sometimes the most powerful response is to say nothing at all. What would happen if every major decision you made today was filtered through raw emotion, fear, anger, even excitement? Picture a CEO scrambling to salvage a failing project, their panic spreading through the team like wildfire. Or a parent snapping at their child in frustration, only to regret it moments later. This is the exact scenario Stoic leaders trained themselves to avoid through apatheia, not the absence of feeling, but the mastery of it. Seneca captured it perfectly. Reason is the commander, emotion the unruly soldier. One must obey, the other govern. Take the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, where Scipio Africanus faced Hannibal's war elephants, a sight designed to trigger terror. Instead of reacting, Scipio calmly rearranged his troop formations, leaving gaps for the charging beasts to pass through harmlessly. His soldiers, seeing his composed focus, mirrored it. The result, one of history's most decisive victories. Modern neuroscience confirms this approach. When we detach from emotional spikes, the prefrontal cortex, the brain's rational center, takes the lead. Studies of elite athletes and military commanders reveal they share this trait, the ability to acknowledge fear or anger without letting it hijack their next move. Now contrast that with a common boardroom scenario. Two executives receive the same bad news, a key client withdrawing. The first slams their fist on the table, spiraling into blame. The second pauses, then methodically lists contingency plans. Who would you trust to steer the ship? The Stoics called this gap proherses, the space between stimulus and response where true choice lies. It's why Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. Here's how to apply it. Next time emotions flare, try this 3-step Stoic interrupt. First, label the feeling silently. This is frustration. Just naming it diminishes its grip. Second, anchor yourself physically. Feel your feet on the ground, your breath steadying. Finally, reframe the situation. Is my reaction serving me or sabotaging me? Even a 5-second pause can reroute a heated moment. Think back to your last major decision made in anger or anxiety. How might it have unfolded if you'd approached it with stoic detachment? The goal isn't to become emotionless, it's to ensure your choices come from clarity, not chaos. After all, as Seneca reminded us, no wind favors the sailor who has no destined port. Emotion might fuel the journey, but reason must hold the compass. Cato the Younger once walked through Rome's streets as a political rival hurled insults at him. The man grew louder, more desperate, until finally sputtering into silence, not because Cato fought back, but because he never flinched. That's the art of non-reaction, letting provocations crumble under their own weight. Marcus Aurelius described it as wrestling with a pig. You both get dirty, but the pig enjoys it. The Stoics didn't advocate ignoring threats out of weakness. They saw strategic indifference as a way to disarm adversaries without lifting a finger. Take modern social media, where outrage fuels engagement. When someone posts an inflammatory comment, the instinct is to fire back. But what happens when you don't? The provocateur, deprived of the reaction they crave, often escalates until they reveal their own pettiness to everyone watching. A study of online conflicts found that when one party disengages, the other's follow-up messages become increasingly irrational, damaging their credibility far more than any rebuttal could. This mirrors Seneca's advice: the greatest remedy for anger is delay. By refusing to engage, you force the other side to confront the emptiness of their own words. Here's the paradox: non-reaction isn't surrender. It's a deliberate choice to conserve energy for battles that matter. Think of a martial artist who sidesteps a wild punch. Their opponent's own momentum throws them off balance. The Stoics called this ataraxia, a state of unshakable calm that comes from discerning what deserves your attention. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journals, "You don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you. Try this today. Identify one provocation, a rude coworker, a baiting text, and experiment with letting it pass unanswered. Observe how it feels to redirect that energy towards something productive. Notice how the dynamic shifts when you refuse to play the expected role. As Epictetus taught, any person capable of angering you becomes your master." Non-reaction isn't about them. It's about reclaiming sovereignty over your own mind. The next time chaos knocks, remember, sometimes the most powerful reply is leaving the door unopened. In Sparta, a king once dined on the same black broth as his soldiers, his cloak as frayed as theirs. No speeches about equality were needed. His actions etched the lesson deeper than any words could. The Stoics called this synkatathesis, the alignment of behavior with belief. Epictetus put it bluntly: don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Ancient leaders understood that integrity isn't proclaimed. It's proven daily in choices both grand and mundane. Consider two rulers. One dazzles crowds with stirring speeches about sacrifice, yet lives in luxury while his people starve. The other, like Roman Emperor Diocletian, voluntarily retired to farm cabbages after reforming an empire, proving his values weren't just performance. Who commanded lasting loyalty? Research on modern organizations reveals a striking pattern: teams mirror a leader's actions, not their mandates. A study of Fortune 500 companies found that employees were 3 times more likely to trust leaders who consistently modeled the behaviors they expected from others. This isn't just about morality, it's tactical. When Alexander the Great marched his army through the Gedrosian desert, he refused water while his men suffered thirst. His silent sacrifice ignited their endurance far more than any pep talk. The Stoic principle here is homologia, living in harmony with your professed ideals. Seneca wrote, "A throne doesn't make a leader makes the throne." Now turn the lens inward. When was the last time your actions outpaced your words? Maybe it's staying late to help a colleague after preaching teamwork, or admitting fault when you've emphasized accountability. Try this exercise for 1 week. Document where your behavior diverges from your stated values. No one else needs to see it. The goal is awareness. Like Marcus Aurelius reviewing his day each evening, you'll spot gaps where influence leaks. The Spartan king's frayed cloak wasn't poverty, it was a silent sermon. Every scuff proved his philosophy wasn't just for show. That's the invisible strategy at work. When your life becomes the argument, persuasion happens without a single word. In 333 BC, Alexander the Great stood at the edge of the known world, his army exhausted, his supply lines stretched thin, and demanded they march farther into India. His generals warned of monsoons, unfamiliar terrain, and rebel forces. He refused to listen. The result, a mutiny that forced his greatest retreat. This wasn't just a military misstep, it was a failure of Stoic wisdom. The same man who once channeled apatheia to conquer empires had forgotten the core tenet: focus only on what you can control. Seneca saw this pattern repeat through history. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality, but also in our refusal to distinguish between what's ours to command and what isn't. Now contrast this with Marcus Aurelius governing Rome during a plague. He couldn't stop the disease, but he controlled his response, organizing burial crews, securing grain supplies, and showing up daily to lead despite personal grief. His journals reveal the mindset. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This is the dichotomy of control, the Stoic practice of dividing the world into 2 categories. What's within your power, your judgments, actions, and desires, and what isn't, other people's opinions, natural disasters, or yesterday's mistakes. Ancient leaders thrived not by ignoring limits, but by embracing them, then excelling within those boundaries. Modern psychology validates this. A Yale study of corporate leaders found that those who obsessed over uncontrollable factors, market shifts, competitors' moves, reported 40% higher stress levels and made poorer decisions than peers who focused on adaptable strategies. Like a Stoic general surveying a battlefield, they assessed fixed realities, terrain, weather before deploying flexible tactics. This mirrors Epictetus's advice: make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Think of a micromanager. You've known someone who burns out trying to dictate every detail. Now picture a Stoic alternative, a leader who sets clear standards, then trusts their team to adapt. The Roman army operated this way. Centurions received objectives, not step-by-step orders, enabling them to improvise when battles shifted. This wasn't passivity, it was precision targeting of effort. As Seneca wrote, no one is crushed by fortune unless they're first deceived by her. Trying to control the uncontrollable is what exhausts us, not the challenges themselves. Here's the litmus test. When you feel overwhelmed, ask, is this mine to solve? Not theoretically, but practically. A ship's captain can't control the storm, only the sails. A parent can't shield a child from every hurt, only equip them to heal. The moment ancient leaders grasped this, their influence grew. Xerxes whipping the sea for destroying his bridges achieved nothing. Themistocles leveraging Persia's own navy against them at Salamis changed history. So pause and reflect. What invisible ropes are you tugging at, convinced they'll move the mountain? A relationship you can't force to mend, a market trend you can't single-handedly reverse. The Stoic fix is simple but radical. Pour that energy into what you can shape, your preparation, your perspective, your next move. As Marcus Aurelius whispered to himself before dawn, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Control isn't an illusion, it's just smaller and far more powerful than we've been taught to believe. Fabius Maximus earned his nickname, the Delayer, not from weakness but from ruthless patience. As Hannibal's army rampaged through Italy, crushing every Roman force that faced him head-on, Fabius refused to play the enemy's game. Instead, he shadowed Hannibal's troops, cutting supply lines and waiting, sometimes for months, to strike only when victory was certain. His fellow senators called it cowardice. History calls it brilliance. This is Kairos, the Stoic concept of seizing the opportune moment, and it's the difference between reaction and strategy. Marcus Aurelius captured the essence in his Meditations. Time is a river of passing events. Strong is he who stands, observes, and acts at the right instant. Fast forward to modern Silicon Valley, where two tech CEOs face identical crises: a rival's surprise product launch. The first scrambles to release a half-finished counteroffer within days, riddled with bugs. The second spends weeks refining their response, then times it to drop during their competitor's weakest quarter. Guess which company dominates the market 5 years later? A Harvard Business Review study of 1,000 corporate decisions found that rushed reactions failed 73% more often than deliberate, timed moves. Just like Fabius with Hannibal, the winners weren't slower, they were strategic. The Stoics saw time not as an enemy to beat, but as a tool to wield. Consider the vineyard owner who prunes too early and loses the harvest, versus one who waits for the precise day when the branches are ready. Or the negotiator who jumps at the first offer instead of letting silence work in their favor. This isn't procrastination, it's the discipline of preparation meeting opportunity. Seneca described it as holding the reins of impulse so tightly that you can feel when the horse begins to gallop on its own. Think back to your last impulsive decision. Maybe it was sending an angry email, taking a job offer too quickly, or interrupting someone mid-argument. Now imagine if you'd let the moment breathe. If you'd watched for the crack in the other side's confidence, the shift in circumstances that turned the odds in your favor. That's Kairos in action. Ancient generals knew what modern psychologists confirm. Haste comes from fear, but timing comes from clarity. Here's the challenge. Next time urgency screams at you to act, pause and ask Fabius's question. Is this necessary now or just necessary? Watch how often waiting reveals a better path. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself each dawn, the art of living is more like wrestling than dancing, because it requires readiness to stand firm against what comes suddenly, not just graceful movement. True power doesn't always charge forward. Sometimes it stands perfectly still until the world moves into place around it. Alexander the Great insisted his soldiers worship him as a god, demanding they kneel before his golden throne. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an even larger empire centuries later, wrote in his private journal, "Take care not to be Caesarified, not to be dyed purple." This is the Stoic shield of humility in action, a weapon so counterintuitive most never see its strength. Where Alexander's hubris bred resentment that outlived him, Marcus's modesty turned critics into allies. The difference wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Epictetus laid it bare. If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, don't make excuses. Reply: he must not know my other faults, or he would have mentioned those too. Consider a modern parallel. In 2012, a major tech company CEO faced backlash over a failed product launch. While his peers might have blamed market conditions or their team, he stood before shareholders and said, "This was my mistake. Here's exactly how we'll fix it." Overnight, outrage turned to respect. A Wharton study later analyzed this phenomenon. Leaders who admitted faults were perceived as 23% more competent than those who deflected blame. Why? Because humility signals security, not insecurity. It proves you prioritize truth over ego, a lesson Marcus Aurelius embodied when he wrote, "The best way to avenge yourself is not to become like the wrongdoer." The Stoics saw vanity as a vulnerability. When Julius Caesar allowed statues of himself to be draped in royal purple, he planted the seeds of his own assassination. Contrast that with George Washington, who after winning the Revolutionary War publicly returned his military commission to Congress, proving he served the nation, not his ambition. That single act of humility silenced whispers of dictatorship and cemented his legacy. As Seneca warned, a throne gives no true greatness, for greatness lies in the soul, not the title. Here's the challenge: recall a moment when pride cost you. Maybe it was doubling down on a flawed idea to save face, or dismissing feedback that stung your ego. Now imagine the alternative: acknowledging the misstep with candor. That's the Stoic pivot from defensiveness to power. The Roman general Scipio Africanus, after conquering Carthage, refused triumphal parades, telling the Senate the real victory was surviving the temptations of success. His restraint earned him something no military campaign could: enduring trust. Modern psychology confirms this. Researchers at the University of Zurich found teams led by humble executives showed 37% higher collaboration and innovation. Why? Because admitting "I don't know" invites others to contribute, while pretending to have all answers isolates you. This mirrors Epictetus's teaching. It is impossible to learn what you think you already know. So next time pride whispers to hide a flaw, remember the Stoic reframe: humility isn't about diminishing yourself. It's about disarming critics, strengthening trust, and wielding the quiet authority that comes when you have nothing to prove. As Marcus Aurelius scribbled on the front lines of battle, the higher the rank, the more restraint must shine. True influence begins where the need for applause ends. Julius Caesar didn't wait for winter to cripple his armies, he planned for it. While other generals huddled in camps praying for mild weather, Caesar stockpiled grain months in advance, designed cold weather gear for his troops, and mapped sheltered routes through the Alps. By the time snow fell, his legions weren't just surviving, they were advancing. This wasn't luck, it was premeditatio malorum, the Stoic practice of anticipating obstacles to disarm their power. Seneca put it bluntly: what you've anticipated dissolves the force of the blow. Unexpectedness adds weight to any calamity. Picture two CEOs facing an economic downturn. The first scrambles to cut costs when revenues plummet, panicking employees and investors. The second, having stress-tested their business for this exact scenario, calmly activates contingency plans, renegotiating leases, pivoting services, even using the downturn to acquire struggling competitors. Who emerges stronger? Modern neuroscience confirms the Stoic advantage. MRI scans show that when we mentally rehearse challenges, the brain processes real-life versions with less panic and more clarity. A Yale study of crisis leaders found those who practiced premeditatio malorum made decisions 34% faster under pressure because they'd already walked the path in their minds. This isn't pessimism, it's tactical foresight. The Stoics didn't dwell on worst-case scenarios to fear them, but to defang them. Marcus Aurelius began each morning visualizing everything that could go wrong: rude colleagues, failed plans, even his own death, not to despair but to rehearse his response. As he wrote, "The art of living is more like wrestling than dancing, because you must stand ready and firm to meet whatever comes." Ancient generals called this strategia, the difference between being surprised by an ambush and having flankers already positioned to counter it. Here's how to apply it today. Choose one challenge looming on your horizon: a tough conversation, a financial squeeze, a career pivot. Now close your eyes and vividly imagine 3 ways it could unravel. Feel the discomfort, then script your countermoves. This mental inoculation works like a vaccine. Small doses of imagined adversity build immunity to real-world chaos. Epictetus trained his students this way, asking, "What will you do if the audience boos your speech?" until they could shrug and reply, "Then I'll speak worse than I hoped, but better than they expected." History's greatest explorers understood this. Before crossing the Atlantic, Ferdinand Magellan packed supplies for 5 years, triple his estimated voyage time. Shackleton's Antarctic crew practiced abandoning ship in minutes, long before ice crushed their hull. Their secret wasn't just preparation. It was the psychological edge of knowing nothing could catch them unprepared. Your turn tonight. Borrow a page from the Stoic playbook. Spend 5 minutes mentally walking through tomorrow's biggest risk. See it unfold. Feel the sting, then craft your response. When the moment comes, you won't face the unknown. You'll meet an old acquaintance already disarmed. As Seneca wrote, "The man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive." The obstacle isn't the problem, it's the surprise. Remove that, and you've already won half the battle. When a Persian envoy threatened Sparta with "Our arrows will blot out the sun," King Leonidas didn't rally his troops with a lengthy speech. He simply replied, "Then we will fight in the shade." 5 words that echoed through history. This was the power of the laconic phrase, a Spartan tradition of stripping language down to its most potent essence. The Stoics took this further, turning brevity into philosophy. Marcus Aurelius warned in his Meditations, "The more we say, the less people remember." The fewer the words, the greater the weight. Think of the last time someone drowned you in explanations, a meeting that dragged with circular arguments, or an email that buried its point under paragraphs of jargon. Now recall a leader who cut through noise with crisp clarity, a teacher who explained complex ideas in 1 sentence, or a colleague whose 3-word feedback transformed your approach. Research from Columbia University reveals that concise communicators are perceived as 28% more competent and trustworthy. Why? Because precision signals confidence. When you prune unnecessary words, you force yourself to crystallize your thoughts, and that discipline radiates authority. Consider 2 versions of the same battlefield order. The first, given the current tactical disadvantages and potential for enemy reinforcement, it would be strategically advisable to consider a temporary withdrawal to regroup. The second, from Julius Caesar, retreat forward, soldiers, and conquer. One leaves room for doubt, the other becomes a rallying cry. The Stoics called this brachalogia, the art of conveying maximum meaning with minimum speech. Epictetus trained his students to speak only when their words would improve the silence. Here's the test. Open your sent emails and compare the longest to the shortest. Which ones actually got results? A Stanford study analyzed executive communications and found that messages under 50 words received 86% faster responses, not just because they took less time to read, but because their clarity demanded action. The ancient world knew this. When the Roman Senate sent a warning to a rebellious general, they didn't draft a treatise. They wrote, "Come or we come." 6 letters in Latin, veni aut veniamus. Try this today. Before hitting send on your next message, challenge yourself to have its length without losing meaning. You'll discover something the Spartans and Stoics mastered. Constraints breed creativity. Cutting fluff isn't just about saving time, it's about sharpening your edge. As Seneca wrote, speech is like medicine. The right dose heals, the wrong one poisons. Every unnecessary word dilutes your power. So ask yourself, if your audience could remember only 7 words, which 7 would you choose? Hannibal didn't see the Alps as a barrier, he saw them as his greatest weapon. When the Carthaginian general led his army, complete with war elephants, through those treacherous mountain passes, the Romans assumed nature had done their work for them. No army could survive such a journey, but Hannibal knew something they didn't. Obstacles don't block the path, they are the path. This is the core of Stoic strategy, what Marcus Aurelius called the art of turning impediments into fuel. Epictetus put it even more bluntly: the greater the difficulty, the more glory in surmounting it. Do not pray for easy lives, pray to be stronger. Take the story of a Silicon Valley startup that lost its biggest client days before launch. Most would see disaster. They saw opportunity. Instead of folding, they used the crisis to completely rethink their product, pivoting from a niche service to a scalable platform. 2 years later, that failure became their competitive edge, attracting investors who valued their adaptability. This isn't just resilience, it's Stoic alchemy, the practice of transforming leaden setbacks into golden leverage. The Stoics didn't just endure hardship, they reverse-engineered it. When Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, lost his entire fortune in a shipwreck, he didn't lament his bad luck. He walked into Athens and became a philosopher, later saying, "That shipwreck was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to build a life that couldn't sink." Modern psychology confirms this mindset's power. Studies of elite athletes and entrepreneurs show that those who view obstacles as information rather than opposition consistently outperform peers. A Harvard study found that business leaders who practiced Stoic reframing, asking, "What does this make possible?" instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" recovered from setbacks 42% faster. Here's how to apply it. Pick one current challenge, a rejected proposal, a strained relationship, a financial hurdle. Now channel Epictetus's 3 questions. First, what part of this can I control? Second, what hidden advantage might this reveal? Third, how could this force me to grow in ways comfort never would? The Roman general Marius did this when his army was trapped in a valley with no water. Instead of panicking, he ordered soldiers to dig not just for wells, but to prove their discipline. When they struck water, it became legend. Marius's mules had turned desperation into a morale-boosting spectacle. History's greatest innovators operate this way. When James Dyson's 5127th vacuum prototype failed, he didn't see wasted years. He saw 5,126 lessons on what didn't work. The Stoics called this amor fati, the love of fate, not passive acceptance but active engagement with every twist. As Seneca wrote, difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. Your turn. Look at the mountain in your path. Now ask, what if climbing it isn't the price of success, but the training? Hannibal's Alps forged an army so battle-hardened, they nearly toppled Rome. Your obstacles aren't stopping you, they are preparing you. The next time life hands you an avalanche, remember, snow can bury you or become the very slope that launches you farther than you ever dreamed. Every night before sleep, Marcus Aurelius would unroll his parchment and write not about battles won or decrees issued, but about his own thoughts, failures, and lessons. Those private notes, never meant for publication, became meditations, one of history's most enduring works on leadership. This wasn't mere diary keeping. It was philosophical autopsy, the Stoic practice of dissecting each day to sharpen tomorrow's judgment. Seneca called it the mirror of the soul, writing, "When the lamp is taken away and my wife has fallen silent, I examine my entire day, measuring what I did and said. I hide nothing from myself, pass nothing by." Consider two executives reviewing the same disastrous quarter. The first reacts immediately, slashing budgets, firing staff, pivoting strategy overnight. The second spends 3 evenings analyzing: where did we misread the market? When did ego override evidence? What patterns emerge from past stumbles? The difference isn't intelligence, it's the gap between reacting and reconstructing. Modern neuroscience reveals why this works. Nightly reflection strengthens the brain's error detection circuitry. A Cambridge study found that professionals who practiced 15 minutes of daily self-review corrected decision-making errors 42% faster than peers. The Stoics built this into a ritual, the evening review. Not just recounting events, but interrogating them. Did I act on what I control today? Where did fear masquerade as reason? What would virtue have demanded instead? Epictetus required his students to ask, what did I fail to desire today that was within my reach? What did I desire that wasn't mine to take? This wasn't self-criticism, it was mental recalibration. Like a blacksmith tempering steel, they hammered soft impressions into hardened wisdom through repetition. Try this tonight. Instead of scrolling through your phone before bed, ask one Stoic question. What's one choice today I'd repeat, and one I'd remake if given the chance? Don't just list answers, trace them to their roots. That meeting where you interrupted, was it urgency speaking or insecurity? That postponed project, was it prudence or procrastination? The goal isn't regret, it's pattern recognition. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You need only pay attention, then you'll discern the connections." History's greatest strategists used this practice. Admiral Nelson debriefed every naval engagement, not just to assign blame, but to spot recurring tactical blind spots. Eleanor Roosevelt kept a grief journal to dissect conflicts, uncovering her own triggers. The common thread: they didn't just experience life, they processed it. As Seneca observed, life is very short and anxious for those who forget the past, neglect the present, and fear the future. Reflection turns time into an ally, compressing decades of haphazard experience into years of deliberate growth. Your mind, like a city, accumulates debris without regular cleaning. The Stoic evening review is that street sweeper's cart collecting the day's emotional litter so tomorrow starts uncluttered. Tonight, when the world goes quiet, meet yourself as Marcus did, with honesty, curiosity, and the quiet resolve to wake up wiser. Socrates never gave grand speeches, he asked uncomfortable questions. While the sophists of Athens dazzled crowds with polished rhetoric, he stood in the marketplace probing assumptions with simple queries. What is justice? Can virtue be taught? His power didn't come from eloquence, but from exposing gaps between what people claimed to believe and how they actually lived. This is the Stoic secret most miss. True influence isn't about convincing others, it's about becoming so aligned with truth that your very existence makes hypocrisy squirm. Epictetus put it bluntly, "Don't tell me your philosophy, show me what you're willing to die for, and I'll tell you what you believe." Take Gandhi's Salt March. He didn't rally Indians with fiery lectures about British oppression. He walked 300 miles to the sea, bent down, and picked up a handful of salt, an illegal act under colonial law. That silent defiance ignited a nation. Why? Because his action embodied the injustice more powerfully than any speech could. Research on social movements reveals this pattern. Leaders who live their cause inspire 3 times more followers than those who merely preach it. A Harvard study analyzed political campaigns and found candidates whose personal habits matched their platforms gained 28% more trust, even among opponents. The Stoics called this homologia the harmony between belief and behavior. While the Roman elite paid philosophers to tutor them in clever debate, Seneca warned, "A man who learns while he lives one thing but teaches another, what is he but a thief stealing wisdom's cloak?" Contrast two modern executives. One delivers passionate TD talks about work-life balance while emailing staff at 3 a.m. The other leaves the office at 5 p.m. to coach his daughter's soccer team, and his team's productivity soars because they know his values aren't performative. Here's the litmus test. When your words and actions diverge, which do people believe? Neuroscience confirms we're wired to detect incongruence. Princeton researchers found the brain processes inconsistencies between speech and behavior as physical threats, triggering distrust within milliseconds. That's why Marcus Aurelius spent his nights writing, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. Not as a platitude, but as a tactical advantage, the kind that made soldiers follow him into battle not because he ordered it, but because they couldn't imagine doing otherwise." Think of a leader you'd follow anywhere. Chances are they didn't persuade you with arguments, but with the quiet authority of someone who's done the work themselves. The teacher who stays late to help struggling students after lecturing about dedication. The coach who runs every drill alongside the team. This is the alchemy of alignment. When your life becomes the argument, rhetoric becomes redundant. So tonight, ask yourself Socrates' question, where does my shadow fall? Not where you point others, but where you actually walk. Because influence doesn't bend people to your will, it meets them where your path proves the way. Diogenes didn't live in a barrel because he was poor, he chose it to prove a point. When Alexander the Great, the most powerful man on earth, visited the philosopher and asked what he could do for him, Diogenes simply replied, "Step aside, you're blocking my sunlight." That barrel wasn't a prison, it was a throne. By stripping away every unnecessary want, Diogenes achieved something kings envied, total freedom. The Stoics called this ascesis, the disciplined training of desire, and it's the secret behind history's most unshakable leaders. Marcus Aurelius captured it in his Meditations. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within your thinking. Now picture two CEOs. One chases every luxury, private jets, trophy homes, the latest gadgets, constantly stressed about maintaining his lifestyle. The other wears the same black turtleneck daily, owns few possessions, and focuses solely on his mission. Who wields more power? Research from Princeton University reveals a paradox. Once basic needs are met, additional wealth and possessions actually decrease life satisfaction by amplifying anxiety about loss. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. They practiced voluntary discomfort, sleeping on the floor, fasting, wearing thin cloaks in winter, not to punish themselves, but to prove how little they truly needed. As Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the one who craves more." This isn't just philosophy, it's tactical advantage. When the Roman general Cincinnatus was called from his small farm to lead Rome's armies, he defeated the enemy in days, then immediately resigned and returned to his plow. No palace could tempt him because he'd mastered his desires. Compare that to modern executives who lose focus chasing perks, or politicians corrupted by the very luxuries they swore to resist. A Yale study tracking Fortune 500 leaders found that those practicing minimalist habits like fixed wardrobes or modest offices made decisions 28% faster and with less bias. Why? Because every unmet desire is a mental tax. The fewer you carry, the clearer you think. Here's the challenge for 1 week. Eliminate one thing you want but don't need. Maybe it's that extra coffee, the impulse purchase, or checking likes on your latest post. Notice what happens when you stop feeding the hunger, how space opens up for what truly matters. The Stoics didn't preach deprivation, they practiced selective desire, choosing only those cravings that served their purpose. As Epictetus taught, wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. Your barrel might not be literal, but the freedom it brings is real. Think of the last time you scrolled through endless options, paralyzed by choice. Now imagine Diogenes grinning from his barrel, sunlight on his face. He wasn't missing out, he'd hacked the system. The discipline of desire isn't about having less, it's about needing so little that every step forward is unencumbered. That's the invisible edge. When your ambitions aren't weighed down by your appetites, you move through the world like a ghost, untouchable, unstoppable, free. Cato the Younger once walked into the Roman Senate wearing a tunic so threadbare, his colleagues mocked him for looking like a peasant. His response, "I'd rather be out of step with fashion than with my convictions." While others shifted with political wins, Cato became history's uncompromising symbol, a man who chose exile over bending his principles. This is the Stoic anchor in action. Fixed values that steady you when everything else sways. Seneca called it the compass of the soul, writing, "No wind is favorable to a ship without direction. No circumstance benefits a mind without principles." Imagine two leaders facing public outrage. The first backtracks on policies, polls, and promises, desperate to please every faction. The second, like Cato, stands firm, even as the crowd turns hostile. Who commands lasting respect? Modern psychology reveals a paradox. Leaders who admit uncertainty earn trust, but those who abandon core values lose it irreversibly. A Cambridge study tracking political careers found that officials branded flip-floppers saw approval plummet 40% faster than those who stuck to unpopular but consistent positions. The Stoics understood this centuries earlier. Their four cardinal virtues, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, weren't just ideals, they were non-negotiable coordinates for navigating chaos. Consider the contrast between two CEOs during a scandal. One issues vague apologies while quietly altering company values to match shifting trends. The other, like Patagonia's Yvonne Chouinard, publicly reaffirms commitments even when it costs profits, telling shareholders, "We're in business to save our home planet." If that bothers you, sell your shares. His unshakable stance didn't repel customers. It magnetized a tribe willing to pay premium prices for aligned values. This mirrors Epictetus's teaching. First, tell yourself what kind of person you want to be, then do what you must to keep being it. Here's the litmus test. When was the last time you sacrificed convenience for conviction? Maybe it was returning excess change to a cashier, refusing to gossip about a colleague, or turning down a lucrative deal that crossed ethical lines. Those moments aren't just moral victories, they're strategic reinforcements of your inner anchor. Marcus Aurelius scribbled in his war tent, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be." Be one, not as virtue signaling, but because principles are the ultimate leverage. They silence critics before a word is spoken. So tonight, borrow Cato's practice. List 3 lines you will not cross, no matter the pressure. Not grand ideals like honesty, but specific boundaries. I won't take credit for others' work, even if it costs me a promotion. I'll speak up against injustice, even if it makes me unpopular. Like the Roman general who drew a literal line in the sand and dared his enemies to cross it, your principles gain power when they're visible and immovable. Because in a world of endless compromises, the rarest strength isn't flexibility, it's knowing what you'll never bend on. As Seneca warned, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Your why isn't just your purpose, it's your unshakable foundation. Scipio Africanus, the general who crushed Carthage, once stood weeping over the smoldering ruins of his enemy's capital. When his officers questioned his tears, he whispered, "I fear the same fate for Rome one day." This wasn't weakness, it was strategic vulnerability, a rare admission that even victors aren't immune to fortune's turns. The Stoics saw this as supreme strength, the courage to acknowledge limits while still acting with resolve. Epictetus, born a slave, put it plainly, "Don't pretend you're invincible. Admit what shakes you, then show how you steady yourself." Modern leadership gurus preach radical transparency, but ancient commanders lived it. When Alexander the Great's army mutinied in India, he didn't threaten or flatter them. He stood before his men and listed his own mistakes, pushing too far, ignoring their exhaustion, letting pride cloud his judgment. The result, soldiers who'd refused to march another step now begged to continue. Research from the University of Houston reveals why this works. Leaders who admit faults are perceived as 18% more competent than those who hide them. Vulnerability, when deliberate, becomes credibility. Consider a tech CEO facing a product recall. The typical playbook involves damage control, spin, half apologies, and vague promises. But when one founder stood before cameras and said, "We messed up, here's exactly how, and here's how we'll fix it," sales actually increased. Customers didn't want perfection, they wanted accountability. This mirrors the Stoic practice of Prosoch, constant self-awareness that embraces flaws as fuel for growth. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, "The best way to avenge yourself is to refuse to become like those who wronged you, and to admit when you already have." Here's the paradox: admitting "I don't know" often makes people trust your "I do know." When Ulysses S. Grant took command of Union forces, his predecessor handed him a meticulously detailed battle plan. Grant glanced at it and said, "I haven't read this and I won't pretend to understand it yet." His honesty, far from undermining him, convinced troops they finally had a leader who wouldn't bluff them into slaughter. Try this today. Recall a recent stumble, a missed deadline, a harsh word, a poor judgment call. Now share it with someone affected, not as a confession but as a commitment. "Here's where I went wrong, and here's how I'll do better." Watch how it transforms defensiveness into dialogue. The Stoics didn't see vulnerability as the opposite of strength, but as its foundation. As Seneca wrote while dying, "Even as the thread breaks, the weaver holds steady the loom." True power isn't hiding your fractures, it's showing how they taught you to stand taller. Caesar never charged blindly onto a battlefield. He walked the land first, studying the slope of hills, the bend of rivers, the gaps in tree lines where ambushes might lurk. By the time his legions moved, he'd already fought the battle a dozen times in his mind, not just against enemies, but with the terrain itself as his ally. The Stoics called this physique, the study of nature's logic, and it wasn't just science, it was strategy. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Look beneath the surface." Never let a thing's intrinsic quality or worth escape you. In other words, mastery begins when you stop seeing obstacles and start seeing systems. Picture two CEOs navigating a market crash. The first clings to old models, insisting, "This is how we've always done it." The second, like Caesar surveying a field, analyzes the new landscape, shifting consumer fears, supply chain fractures, emerging niches. Who survives? A Harvard Business Review study found that leaders who practiced environmental scanning, the modern equivalent of physique, adapted to crises 68% faster. They weren't just reacting, they were reading the terrain ahead of time. This is the difference between fighting circumstances and wielding them. When Hannibal crossed the Alps, he didn't curse the snow, he used it to conceal his army's movements. When Netflix saw broadband speeds rising, they didn't just upgrade DVDs, they pivoted to streaming. Both were practicing Stoic physics, observing nature's patterns, then aligning strategy with them. Epictetus taught, don't demand things to happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do, and you'll go on well. Not passive surrender, but active calibration. Now turn the lens inward. What's the true layout of your battlefield? Not the superficial challenges, the quiet undercurrents shaping them. Is your team's resistance to change really about laziness or fear of unspoken instability? Is that competitor's success just luck, or are they exploiting a shift you've missed? Like Caesar tracing a river's hidden eddies, look deeper. Tonight, try this Stoic exercise. Map your current struggle as if it were terrain. Where are the natural advantages you've overlooked, the choke points making progress feel impossible? Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the thing itself isn't the obstacle, your judgment about it is. Context isn't just scenery, it's the silent partner in every victory. Learn to read it and you'll stop pushing against the world and start letting it push you forward. Marcus Aurelius refused to waste energy debating whether his porridge was too hot or his bath too cold, not because he lacked opinions, but because he knew true power lies in conserving effort for what truly moves the needle. The Stoics called this tranquilitas not passive indifference, but the razor-sharp focus that comes from guarding your attention like a general guards his troops. Seneca put it bluntly, we are tight-fisted with money, yet wasteful with time, the one thing it's right to be stingy with. Picture two leaders facing the same crisis. The first exhausts himself answering every email within minutes, micromanaging trivial details while the real fire spreads. The second, like a Roman commander conserving his soldiers' strength, ignores minor skirmishes to fortify the gates that matter. Research from the University of California reveals why this works. Executives who practiced selective neglect made decisions with 42% greater accuracy because their mental reserves weren't depleted by trivia. The Stoics didn't preach laziness, they practiced strategic austerity with their energy. Consider the difference between a blacksmith who hammers randomly all day and one who strikes only when the iron is white hot. Both appear busy, but only one shapes the metal. Ancient Rome's greatest legal minds understood this. When Cicero prepared for trials, he didn't waste hours on every possible argument. He identified the one point that could swing the verdict and honed it to lethal sharpness. This mirrors Epictetus's teaching. No great thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a fig. If you tell me you desire a fig, I answer that there must be time. Let it first blossom, then bear fruit, then ripen. Here's the challenge. Pull out your calendar and highlight every task from last week that moved no needle. That meeting that could have been an email, the social media scroll disguised as market research, the debate over office temperatures. Like Marcus Aurelius skipping petty disputes, ask, what would happen if this simply went undone? A Stanford study found that knowledge workers reclaim 11 hours weekly by eliminating just 3 energy-draining habits. The Stoics didn't achieve more by doing more, they achieved more by preserving more. Now flip the lens. Recall one time you channeled all your effort into a single decisive action, maybe preparing intensely for one client pitch instead of 10 half-hearted ones, or saying no to good opportunities to say yes to great ones. That's tranquilitas in motion, the quiet strength of knowing that impact isn't measured in activity, but in amplitude. As Seneca wrote while advising a young protege, your ship can't take on cargo if it's already full of stones. Every yes to trivia is a no to transcendence. So tonight, audit your energy like a Stoic accountant and invest only where the returns reshape the balance sheet of your life. Rome didn't conquer the Mediterranean in a year. It took centuries of patient expansion, one city, one treaty, one road at a time. While rivals like Carthage sought flashy victories, Rome played the long game, knowing true dominance wasn't about battles won, but systems built. This is the essence of sympatheia, the Stoic concept that all things are interconnected through time, that today's choices ripple far beyond the moment. Epictetus captured it perfectly. No great thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a fig. If you tell me you desire a fig, I answer that there must be time. Let it first blossom, then bear fruit, then ripen. Consider two companies launching similar products. The first rushes to market with half-finished features, chasing quarterly profits. The second spends years refining not just the product, but the ecosystem around it: customer education, supply chains, even cultural shifts that make the innovation inevitable. A Stanford study tracking Fortune 500 firms found that those prioritizing decade-long visions over short-term targets generated 300% higher shareholder returns over 20 years. Why? Because compounding doesn't just apply to money, it applies to trust, expertise, and influence. The Stoics called this macrologia, the art of measuring life in epochs, not moments. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way," he wasn't just preaching resilience, he was revealing a tactical truth. Rome's greatest strength wasn't its legions, but its roads. While enemies focused on winning territory, Romans spent decades laying thousands of miles of stone pathways infrastructure that made future conquests effortless. Hannibal could cross the Alps once. Rome could move armies anywhere, anytime, forever. Modern psychology confirms this. A University of Pennsylvania study found that people who framed goals as marathons, not sprints, were 68% more likely to achieve them because they invested in systems, not just outcomes. Now contrast this with today's cult of urgency, the hustle gurus preaching overnight success, the viral trends that flare and fade. The Stoics would have recognized this as akrasia, the weakness of acting against one's better judgment for instant gratification. Seneca warned, "There is nothing the busy man is less busied with than living." True power lies in distinguishing between motion and momentum, between looking productive and actually progressing. Think of an oak tree. It doesn't curse its slow growth. It invests in roots that will one day crack stone. The same applies to your career, relationships, or personal growth. What if, instead of chasing promotions, you spent 5 years mastering skills that make you irreplaceable? Instead of forcing a strained friendship, you planted seeds of trust that bloom years later. The Roman aqueducts didn't quench thirst the day they were designed, but once built, they fed millions for centuries. So ask yourself, what's your version of those aqueducts? Not what will impress others this quarter, but what will outlast you. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself each dawn, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think, not as morbid fixation, but as liberation, the clarity that comes when you stop racing clocks and start building for eras. The long game isn't about waiting, it's about constructing tomorrow's leverage with today's hands. The world sees the sprinter breaking the tape at the finish line, but never the pre-dawn laps when frost still clings to the track. We marvel at the concert pianist's flawless performance, unaware of the 10,000 hours spent rehearsing scales in empty rooms. This is the paradox of mastery. What makes the difference remains invisible. The Stoics called it meli, the relentless practice that happens far from applause. Marcus Aurelius captured its essence in his private writings. What stands in the way becomes the way. The obstacle you despise today is the foundation you'll stand on tomorrow. Take the story of Abraham Lincoln's legendary Cooper Union speech in 1860. Crowds marveled at his eloquence, but few knew about the months he spent buried in law libraries, meticulously fact-checking every historical reference until he could rebut slavery's defenders point by point. That speech didn't just sway an audience, it secured him the presidency. Modern neuroscience confirms this principle. A Cambridge study found that experts across fields share one trait: they log 4 times more solitary preparation than peers before major moments. The Stoics didn't wait for crises to reveal their character. They forged it in advance, like blacksmiths tempering steel in darkness. Consider 2 executives preparing for a boardroom showdown. One wings it with charisma, relying on past success. The other, like a Stoic practitioner, spends weekends dissecting competitors' filings, rehearsing rebuttals to every possible objection, even scripting pauses for maximum impact. Research from Columbia Business School reveals the latter outperforms by 40%, not because they're smarter, but because they've already lived the meeting a dozen times in their mind. This is melite in action, the unseen repetitions that make excellence inevitable. Now turn the mirror inward. What's your version of those pre-dawn laps? The skill you're polishing when no one's watching, the pages you're drafting that may never be read, the quiet habits building resilience for storms still over the horizon. Epictetus warned his students, "Don't hope for events to happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do, and you'll go on well." The preparation isn't just about controlling outcomes, it's about becoming someone no outcome can shake. Tonight, try this Stoic exercise. Map one area where you crave visible success, then identify its invisible counterpart. Want influence? Start with the solitary study of human nature. Seek courage, practice discomfort in small, daily doses. As Seneca wrote while tutoring Nero, luck is what happens when preparation meets the moment. The world will only ever see your moment, but you'll know the truth. That unglamorous groundwork isn't the price of greatness. It's the alchemy that transforms effort into inevitability. Spartan boys in the Agoj training system weren't given shields. They were told to return with them or on them. Brutal, absolutely. But that very harshness forged an army that held off Persia with just 300 men at Thermopylae. This is the paradox of constraints. What appears to limit us often unlocks our greatest ingenuity. The Stoics called it amor fati, the love of fate, not passive acceptance, but the active embrace of limits as raw material for mastery. Epictetus, born with a lame leg and sold into slavery, put it plainly: don't seek for everything to happen as you wish, but wish for everything to happen as it does, and your life will go well. Consider 2 startup teams today. The first gets 20 million in funding, a lavish office, and every tech toy imaginable. The second operates from a garage with second-hand laptops and a shoestring budget. Counterintuitively, research from Stanford shows the second group innovates 40% faster. Why? Scarcity forces focus. When you can't throw money at problems, you're forced to think differently, just like Sparta's soldiers, who turned their lack of armor into unmatched mobility, or the Stoics, who transformed exile and persecution into philosophical fuel. History's greatest breakthroughs often come from cramped conditions. Shakespeare wrote King Lear during plague lockdowns. Marie Curie discovered radioactivity in a leaky shed. The Apollo 13 astronauts' jury rigged a carbon dioxide filter from duct tape and socks when their lives depended on it. Constraints don't stifle creativity, they channel it. The Stoics practiced this daily, treating every obstacle as a hidden invitation. What does this make possible? Marcus Aurelius refined his philosophy not in peaceful retreats, but in war camps, scribbling wisdom by torchlight between battles. His limits became his leverage. Here's the challenge: grab a pen and list 3 current constraints: tight budget, limited time, lack of connections. Now reframe each as a forced advantage. That budget crunch, it's teaching you ruthless prioritization. The small network, it's breeding deeper relationships. Even physical limits can become strengths. Demosthenes, the ancient Greek orator, overcame a stutter by practicing speeches with pebbles in his mouth, turning a flaw into legendary eloquence. The next time you hit a wall, remember the Spartan shield. Its weight wasn't just a burden, it was what made their phalanx unstoppable. Your constraints aren't blocking your path, they're shaping the unique way you'll break through them. As Epictetus whispered to his students, "The world is rough, but it's the whetstone that sharpens the blade." The question isn't whether you'll face limits, it's whether you'll let them grind you down or polish you into something sharper than you ever imagined. Socrates shuffled through Athens barefoot, his cloak often tattered, his beard unkempt, yet when he spoke, even the city's most polished aristocrats fell silent. His students later admitted they'd initially dismissed him as a beggar, only to realize his ragged appearance concealed a mind sharper than any sword. This was the Stoic principle of adiaphora in action, the recognition that traits like wealth, status, and beauty are indifferent, neither good nor bad in themselves. What mattered wasn't the shell, but the substance within. Marcus Aurelius echoed this in his Meditations. Look beneath the surface, never let a thing's intrinsic quality or worth escape you. Picture two modern politicians campaigning for office. The first spends hours perfecting his smile for cameras, tailoring speeches to polls, and obsessing over tie colors. The second, like Socrates, shows up in wrinkled suits, skips scripted sound bites, and answers questions with uncomfortable honesty. Who earns deeper trust? Research from Princeton reveals a paradox. Voters initially favor polished candidates, but over time they gravitate toward those perceived as authentic, even if flawed. A Harvard study tracked CEO approval ratings and found leaders who prioritized results over image scored 35% higher in long-term employee loyalty. The Stoics would have nodded knowingly they'd seen this pattern play out centuries earlier in Rome's Senate halls. Consider the contrast between Emperor Nero and his tutor Seneca. Nero draped himself in jewels, staged elaborate spectacles, and demanded statues of himself across the empire, all to mask his incompetence. Seneca, though wealthy, wore simple tunics and wrote, "A man's worth is no greater than the worth of his ambitions." When Nero ordered Seneca's suicide, the philosopher met death with the same calm he'd shown in life, proving that true authority comes from inner coherence, not external theater. Here's the litmus test. When your reputation diverges from your character, which do people truly remember? Modern psychology confirms we're wired to detect incongruence. A Yale study found that inconsistencies between appearance and behavior trigger subconscious distrust like a beautifully wrapped empty box. That's why Diogenes carried a lamp in broad daylight, searching for an honest man. His theatrics weren't just satire, they exposed how rarely glamour aligns with merit. Now turn the lens inward. What facades have you mistaken for foundations? The luxury car that impresses strangers but strains your budget, the Instagram persona that outshines your real relationships. The Stoics practiced a powerful exercise. They'd imagine losing everything: status, possessions, even physical abilities, then ask, what would remain of my worth? Try this today. Strip away one symbol you lean on for validation, maybe the job title in your email signature, or the designer label you wear for meetings. Notice how it feels to stand uncovered. As Epictetus taught, it's not what you have that defines you, but what you can do without. The next time you're tempted to judge or be judged by surfaces, remember Socrates' lesson: the shell never cracks the nut. Real influence doesn't come from dazzling the eye, but from deepening the trust that lives beneath it. Rome's legions didn't win every battle, but they won the war. When Hannibal's forces crushed them at Cannae, killing over 50,000 soldiers in a single day, the surviving Romans didn't double down or despair. They did something radical. They retreated, not in chaos, but with precision, regrouping, fortifying cities, and starving Hannibal's army of decisive victories until the tide turned. This was no admission of defeat. It was anachoresis, the Stoic art of strategic withdrawal. Seneca saw deeper wisdom in these pauses. Even while we're forced to rest, we can prepare. The bow kept always taut will break. Think of a modern CEO who steps away for a 6-month sabbatical after a product flop. Investors panic. Competitors smirk until she returns with a pivot that dominates the market. Like Rome's legions, she understood that retreat isn't surrender, it's repositioning. A Harvard study tracking executive performance found that leaders who took intentional breaks made decisions with 37% greater long-term impact. The Stoics practiced this daily through melite moments of deliberate stillness to sharpen focus. Marcus Aurelius would isolate himself in his chambers not to escape leadership, but to refine it, writing, "Nowhere can a man find quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." History's greatest comebacks often begin with retreats. When Steve Jobs left Apple in 1985, critics wrote his epitaph. Yet those wilderness years birthed Pixar and NXT experiences that honed his vision for Apple's rebirth. Similarly, the Stoic philosopher Musonius Rufus was exiled to a barren island, only to turn it into a thriving school where students flocked to learn amid the rocks. As Epictetus, his pupil, later taught, "It's not what happens to you, but how you use it. Here's the challenge: when was the last time you stepped back to leap farther?" Not just a vacation, but a true withdrawal, silencing inputs to hear your own strategy. Try this Stoic exercise. Block one day this month for a mental siege. No emails, no meetings, just 3 questions: what's working? What's draining energy? What would happen if I stopped doing the unnecessary? Like Rome's legions rebuilding behind their walls, you'll emerge not with more effort, but with better leverage. Nature understands this rhythm. Forests need winter to reset. Rivers carve canyons not by constant force, but by persistent return. Even the stars withdraw at dawn to gather light for the next night. Your retreat isn't a pause in the journey, it's the hidden current that carries you farther. As Seneca reminded a weary friend, sometimes even to live is an act of courage. And sometimes to lead means knowing when to step away so you can step up. Augustus didn't restore Rome's crumbling republic with grand speeches or empty promises. He did it by showing up. Day after day, in the same modest home, wearing the same simple toga, governing by the same predictable laws, the man who could have crowned himself a god chose instead to become something rarer, a constant. This was Fides in action, the Stoic virtue of trustworthiness so unshakable, it became Rome's invisible currency. Epictetus, once a slave who knew the price of broken vows, put it plainly: "Don't swear you'll do it, just do it." Then no oath is needed. Think of 2 leaders you've known. The first dazzles with charisma, visionary speeches, bold claims, a magnetic presence that draws crowds. The second speaks softly, delivers consistently, and never promises what they can't fulfill. Who do you really rely on when stakes are high? Modern psychology confirms what the Stoics knew. A Harvard study tracking workplace trust found that reliability outweighs charm by a factor of 3 to 1. Employees will forgive a gruff boss who keeps their word far sooner than a charismatic one who doesn't. Consider the contrast between 2 historical figures. Alcibiades, Athens' golden boy, could persuade crowds to reverse entire policies with a single speech, yet his constant betrayals left him exiled and despised. Cato the Younger, though stern and uncharismatic, became Rome's moral compass simply because his yes meant yes and his no stayed no. The Stoics saw this as homologia, alignment between word and deed so complete it rendered persuasion unnecessary. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one," he wasn't preaching morality, he was outlining strategy. Trust isn't earned through eloquence, but through the silent accumulation of kept promises. Now turn the lens to your own life. Where have you been prioritizing persuasion over reliability? Maybe it's the project deadline you stretched just this once, or the casual "I'll call you" that never materialized. Each seems minor, but like Augustus daily walks through Rome, it's the repetition that builds empires or erodes them. A Stanford study revealed something startling. People remember broken promises twice as long as kept ones. One missed commitment can undo a dozen fulfilled ones. Here's the Stoic exercise. For 1 week, track every promise you make, not just the solemn vows, but the throwaway lines. "I'll email that by noon." Let's meet next Tuesday. Note which ones bend or break, then ask, if your trustworthiness were a currency, would you be rich or bankrupt? The answer might surprise you. As Seneca warned Nero, who ignored him, a throne doesn't make a king, keeping his word does. The next time you're tempted to win someone over with words, try silence instead. Let your actions speak, because in the end, trust isn't something you ask for. It's something you become, and unlike charisma, which fades with time, fides only grows stronger. Like the oak that outlasts the flower, your reliability will outshine any words you could have said. Seneca's exile should have broken him. Banished to Corsica's rocky shores, accused of adultery with Rome's princess, stripped of wealth and status by all accounts, it was ruin. Yet from that barren island came his most enduring letters, essays that would shape Western thought for millennia. He called exile not a punishment, but a laboratory, a place where philosophy ceased to be theory and became survival. This is the Stoic practice of gymnasium, the deliberate training of character through hardship. Marcus Aurelius later crystallized it. The obstacle in the path becomes the path. What stands in the way becomes the way. History's greatest stress tests reveal what comfort conceals. Take 2 modern CEOs navigating identical scandals. The first, accustomed to smooth sailing, crumbles blaming PR teams, lashing out at critics, watching their company's value evaporate. The second, forged in earlier failures, responds differently. They gather their team and say, "This is our chance to prove who we really are," then methodically rebuilds trust through transparency. A Harvard study of corporate crises found leaders with prior adversity recovered 42% faster, not because they knew more, but because hardship had taught them what couldn't be learned in boardrooms: how to endure. The Stoics didn't just endure suffering, they reverse-engineered it. When the philosopher Zeno lost his entire fortune in a shipwreck, he wandered into Athens and stumbled upon a bookseller reading Socrates. In that moment, he realized the shipwreck hadn't taken everything, it had stripped away distractions, leaving only what mattered. His resulting philosophy, Stoicism, would outlast empires. Modern psychology confirms this alchemy. Research from the University of Buffalo reveals that people who reframe trauma as a catalyst for growth develop what scientists call post-traumatic resilience, a hardness that doesn't brittle but bends. Now apply this lens to your own life. Recall a failure that felt like an ending, a lost job, a rejected proposal, a public misstep. What if that wasn't your collapse but your Corsica? Like Seneca writing under exile's open sky, or Nelson Mandela studying law in his prison cell, adversity often hands us the very tools we'll later wield as weapons. The Stoics called this amor fati, the love of fate, not passive acceptance, but the active pursuit of meaning in every twist. Tonight, try this exercise. Write down one past setback, then list 3 skills it forced you to develop. Maybe that layoff taught you to network authentically, or that failed project revealed your blind spots. Marcus Aurelius kept such lists in his campaign tent, scribbling, "The impediment to action advances action." What we call obstacles are often the universe's way of sculpting leaders, if we have the eyes to see the chisel as a gift. Antoninus Pius ruled Rome for 23 years without ever raising his voice in anger, a feat so remarkable, historians still debate how one man could wield such power without ever seeming to wield it at all. His secret wasn't force or flattery, but something far more enduring: eustatheia, the Stoic art of unshakable steadiness. While other emperors left legacies of conquest or grand monuments, Antoninus left something rarer, a reputation so grounded even his enemies trusted his word. Epictetus, who taught Marcus Aurelius, captured this power perfectly. No one is free who is not master of themselves. A rock thrown into the air shows its weakness by falling. A mind shows its strength by staying unmoved. Consider two modern leaders navigating a corporate scandal. The first holds frantic press conferences, issues contradictory statements, and lashes out at critics, each reaction fueling the fire. The second, channeling Antoninus, responds with measured silence at first, then delivers one clear message: "Here's what happened, here's what we're doing, and here's how we'll prevent it." A decade later, which company still has public trust? Research from the Kellogg School of Management reveals that executives who maintain emotional consistency during crises retain 46% more customer loyalty long-term. Their steadiness doesn't just calm storms, it becomes their hallmark, the trait people remember when everything else fades. This isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about channeling it with precision. When the Stoics spoke of apatheia, they didn't mean apathy. They meant the disciplined focus of a surgeon who feels the urgency of the operation but keeps their hand steady. Think of a ship's captain in a squall. The crew doesn't need false cheer or panicked orders. They need someone who acknowledges the danger while adjusting the sails with calm certainty. Marcus Aurelius demonstrated this during the Marcomannic Wars, writing in his journal amid battle, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." His troops didn't follow him because he pretended all was well, but because his composure proved no challenge was beyond mastery. Now imagine your own legacy. Not the resume bullets or social media posts, but how people describe you when you're not in the room. "She's the one who stays clear-headed when everyone else panics," or "You can trust him to think before he speaks." These aren't just compliments, they're the quiet currency of real influence. A Stanford study tracking workplace dynamics found that colleagues consistently rate steady performers as 28% more competent than volatile ones, even when both deliver similar results. Why? Because equanimity signals deeper mastery, not just of skills, but of self. Tonight, try this Stoic exercise. Recall one moment when emotions nearly overruled your judgment. Maybe it was a heated argument where words spilled out faster than thoughts, or a crisis that triggered knee-jerk decisions. Now replay it with Antoninus's restraint, not freezing, but pausing long enough to respond instead of react. That split-second gap is where legacy is forged. As Seneca wrote while coaching Nero, who tragically ignored him, "A throne doesn't make a king, self-possession does." Your power isn't measured by how loudly you lead, but by how deeply your calm resonates in others long after you've left the room. From the battlefield to the boardroom, history's most enduring leaders shared a hidden weapon: silence. Not the silence of hesitation, but the deliberate stillness of a mind trained to observe, adapt, and act with precision. Marcus Aurelius ruling an empire from his war tent, Seneca turning exile into enlightenment, Cotto facing down corruption with nothing but his unbreakable will. These weren't just men of action. They were architects of invisible advantage, wielding presence like a shield, silence like a scalpel, and detachment like a compass. The thread connecting them, a four-part strategy that bends time to its will, the weight of presence to anchor chaos, the discipline of silence to expose truth, the clarity of detachment to navigate storms, and the foresight of preparation to transform obstacles into stepping stones. Consider how these principles play out beyond ancient texts. A parent refusing to engage in a child's tantrum, not from indifference, but to teach emotional self-regulation through the power of calm. A CEO facing shareholder panic with measured words, knowing less speech often carries more authority. Even in personal growth, choosing to journal before reacting to criticism, or visualizing setbacks before they arrive to disarm their sting. The Stoics didn't just preach these tools, they pressure-tested them in the furnace of war, politics, and human nature, proving that influence isn't about volume. It's about resonance. Marcus Aurelius left us a clue in his private meditations. The quieter you become, the more you can hear, not just external cues, but the inner voice that distinguishes impulse from wisdom. This is the heart of silent strategy mastery that whispers where others shout. The battlefield commander who wins without drawing blood, the negotiator who secures terms by saying less, the parent whose steady gaze stops misbehavior faster than any threat. All are practicing the same ancient calculus. Energy conserved is power compounded. Now it's your turn. Choose one principle to embody this week. Maybe it's pausing 3 breaths before responding in a heated moment, or writing down 3 potential obstacles before a big decision. Like a Stoic sculptor, remove what's unnecessary to reveal the strength beneath, and tell us in the comments which of these silent strategies resonated most. Your presence, after all, is the first domino. The rest will follow, as Aurelius reminded himself each dawn. Waste no more time arguing what a good leader should be. Be one. The world is waiting.